Thanks, Julie, and really add my congratulations for the terrific session on the Myanmar response. Helpful and useful information. So hello, everyone, and welcome to the final session of this partners meeting, provocatively entitled, perhaps, the GHC Formative Evaluation, Are We Fit for Purpose? As Gabrielle mentioned, and I think I'm really in the dark here, but I'll try and lighten up the screen. As Gabrielle mentioned, I had the pleasure, along with several of you on this call, of sitting on the evaluation reference group. And I know that the executive summary and the recommendations were sent out to partners. As Linda's mentioned in the chat earlier, the full report will also be sent out once it is finalized and approved. But today we'll have the opportunity to present and share the background methodology, some of the key findings and recommendations, and that'll be done through a presentation by Linda and Ricardo, who have very ably helped to shepherd this process over the several weeks and months that the evaluation was underway. And just for a bit of background, this external evaluation was requested by the GHC SAG and really is meant to help inform the development of the GHC strategy as it moves forward for 2026 and 2030. So we'd like this session to really be a chance for partners to reflect on the findings and recommendations, and then, as Gabrielle mentioned as well, to help prioritize those recommendations and help to guide the GHC team on where to best focus their efforts moving forward. So we will have the presentation, and following that, Veronique will guide us through a very quick Mentimeter to assist with that prioritization exercise. We have about 90 minutes for this session, so we'll, of course, have time for questions. And perhaps if I can suggest to Linda and Ricardo, because there is a lot of information that will be presented, that we take a pause after the description of the key findings and just allow partners to ask questions, or if there's need for further detailed or clarification on the findings, they'll have a chance to raise it then. We can then proceed to the presentation of the recommendations and the discussion with partners on how we might prioritize and move forward. So with that, I'll turn it over, Ricardo, I believe, to you first, and to Linda to go through the presentation.
Thank you, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. So we engaged actually some 10 months ago on this evaluation together with Linda, and it's as you know, the last cluster in the midst of the reset that does an evaluation, and we really wanted to see whether the global health cluster was fit for purpose, really to have a forward-looking view on the future strategy. So the recommendations you'll see, are framed in a certain way. So there's this dual purpose of learning and accountability. The organizational learning is both for us, including you as partners, but also for WHO itself, as really an opportunity to move the cluster into an area where we have peer-to-peer learning. And as you were mentioning before, we have several of you that have been part of the reference group that have helped steer this process. Then we had also accountability both to taking into account the different countries that we looked at, but accountability also to the donors. Even if there's just one main donor of the the global health cluster, it is an opportunity also to account back to our different partners. And you can use, once we finalize the report, also in your reporting to donors, extracts of this evaluation to report back on what has been achieved so far. You've got classical OECD DAC criteria. We looked at the period, so in terms of scope, from 2014 to 2025, but really focused on the last 5 years. That was, so to say, the primary focus from a temporal perspective. The first chunk was done on a desk base, especially considering that there's a high rotation also of personnel. There's, from a geographical scope perspective, you've got the global, obviously, where several of you have been interviewed, obviously, but also the regional component and the deep dives in 6 countries, beyond a survey done in 35. Out of scope was impact, because there's often, a lot of elements where you can't see a treatment and non-treatment group. So we didn't have the evaluation team travel to a country where the cluster was not being activated as such. Next, please. So basically, there were mixed methods that were used. So you had a desk review, you had secondary data analysis. There's quite a lot also out there. We had primary data through key informant interviews, but also focus group discussions. There was this online survey that went out to all of the 35 countries where the GHC is activated. And then there was also at some point an analysis of this. You've got the breakdown there in the numbers. Next, please. The countries, let me just recap the countries, sorry, Veronique, on the previous slide, just one element so that you all know, in case you haven't been engaged in this. We had 3 remote countries, which were Myanmar, which was presented earlier, Sudan and Yemen, and then we had in-country visits in Chad, Colombia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Next, please. So this gives you a visual representation of the distribution of the key informants, both at global, regional, national, and subnational level, where you see the subnational component being the strongest. Then you've got also by categories, and you have the major chunk being national and local partners. And this, I think, is quite fundamental, really from a reset also perspective, and also to get some ground truth. Then we have the survey response, and there's a good balance between international and national NGOs, and I believe all of your respective agencies have been consulted in this. But we also have a representation of national health authorities, donors, the also WHO staff that does not work on the cluster, but also other UN agencies in the collective view. Next, please. And now we're going to move into the findings, and I will accept that invitation to make a pause, provided also that Linda joins me, because we've been brothers in arms in this journey with this evaluation that we finally are bringing to base. So first of all, on the relevance component, the global health cluster is considered overall relevant. And why? Because it strengthened basically health management and coordination systems, and has been able to respond to the needs of the most vulnerable during major crisis and disease outbreaks in the countries that required support, and continued doing so even when circumstances on the ground changed. It played a vital role. It really relied on robust needs assessment, so this is positive, and there was an active engagement of key partners. Now, there are some measures in terms of aligning with local realities on the ground that have been put in place, and really real-time information has been critical in that sense. AAP is still an area for improvement, where you need to continue strengthening this component at the country level. Next, please. So on efficiency, one major element was the underfunding. But despite the underfunding, despite the challenging element of finance, there was a positive use of the resources that were available, which were used in an economic and timely way, both at the global and country level. And the judgment there that the independent evaluation team made was that the resources were being used extremely well. And even in emergencies where the global health cluster, was not being activated. Now, we've all observed, I don't know if you had a chance also on Wednesday to participate at the LNAP launch of the global humanitarian report that came out, where there's a prospect with the funding crisis. Just we've gone over the cliff, so to say, and it's plummeting as compared to the levels and the continuous ascent that we've experienced in the past 15 years. So this brings a lot of challenges in terms of the current efficiency also of the cluster, and may also bring prospective challenges unless there is a diversification also of the resource base. This situation really calls for prioritization. We've seen this across the clusters, not just the global health cluster, with the reset agenda being setting the ground for this. Next, please. Now, if you look at the coherence, there's both an internal dimension, but also an external one at the global and the country level. There's a diversified partner engagement. There's good collaboration with major humanitarian actors across the board, with other clusters, but also agencies that are present in deep field on the ground. Now, what we've seen is that this collaboration, can be further mainstreamed within WHO. So the internal coherence dimension, especially when you transition from a primary emergency response to health system strengthening. Now, at the global level, WHO has different roles. You're all familiar with the normative component, the norms and standard setting, which is part of its DNA, as some colleagues talk about. And then there's more an operational, boots on the ground and coordination function. So these are clearly delineated. However, it doesn't always translate at the country level, because you do have these divides between the emergency team and then the folks that are working long-term on the development programs or the technical assistance to the national government. And we've observed also siloed operations and limited collaboration with other WHO emergency units. That was the conclusion that the independent evaluation team came to. Now there's another dimension that we've seen with the regional offices of WHO. They've engaged to a limited extent, largely because it wasn't initially conceived like that. And they've provided varying degrees of support, to the country office. There's some where they're very active, and others where there's absence of the regional footprint in terms of strengthening this. And again, the lack of clarity of a definition of the roles there is evident. Now, with the reset and with the current prioritization process within WHO, this is a question mark, but maybe that will come in the Q&A. Next, please. So on coordination, the intersectoral and the multisectoral collaboration was positive thanks to the efforts of engaging with other sectors. There's the development of joint frameworks, also projects that cut across, and especially also thanks to the partners that have engaged with multiple different actors in that sense, and not just with the health component, have done these type of interventions. But there has been really concerted effort also among the coordinators and at the global level to have this more horizontal approach. And this has been really leading to more integrating and effective responses on the ground. Now, there are certain countries where this is less of a fact. So it's weaker in certain contexts. And next, please. So on connectedness, which is, this relation linking relief, rehabilitation, development, as they said back in the 90s. So this is, we've seen that there's been not much progress in that sense, especially in the transition between the devolution of the planning to the national authorities, also in coordination. I mean, there are isolated cases, such as the case of Colombia, where the government has really a strong role in coordination, but in others, this has been really centralized, and that's one of the core also elements that arises right now in the reset, as you all know. Now, the other dimension is that there's little evidence on the strengthening between the humanitarian programming and the health system strengthening, and that is really one of the elements where WHO can also provide that bridge, because it has part of its team that works on health system strengthening, but this has to be a concerted effort also together done with partners. Now, more specifically, if you look at the leadership roles and the decision-making processes, there's limited devolution of this to the local authority. And there's the gap at the national level and local level that weakens also the opportunity for building coordination capacity and preparing for sustainable transition. So that is very important to keep in mind also for the future. Now, when we've seen that there's not been, with this limited engagement, there's you don't have that transition to this longer term health governance systems. And so the attempts that have been made so far on the nexus are not sufficient efforts. They really need to be doubled down at that level to ensure the transition and the connectedness. Finally, if you look at the dimension of preparedness and contingency planning, there are emerging results that are, but progress overall is slow, and the global level monitoring is still new. So that's an area where, again, there is a major onus on preparedness in several years, but where, let's say, there will be a higher return on investment with meager resources, with the resources going down. So that's an area to consider. Finally, there's this need for standardization to ensure consistent quality in terms of the preparedness activities, but also the integration of these plans across the different countries. Next, please. So the last criteria that we're going to look at is around effectiveness, and the effectiveness is overall mixed. At the global level, against the reconstructed theory of change that the team did against the strategic framework and also the strategic priorities of the global health cluster, it does meet the strategic objectives. It also meets the core cluster functions, but with different degrees of success. There's some components such as the humanitarian management and the coordination system, but there's also diversified collaboration with different humanitarian bodies and the operational capacity with national and local level health partners has been strengthened thanks to the technical assistance. Now, it's difficult to really understand to what degree these changes have been achieved across the health cluster, but that's really because there's no M&E system in place that enables the assessment of performance beyond the activity level. At the higher goal level, where there's more, where you could see the contribution of what the health cluster is intended to achieve. And in the report, when you'll get the report next week, you'll see how this reconstructed, and now we've also presented also in the inception phase, how this reconstructed theory of change has this building block at a higher level. And that's really where you can measure the results beyond the inputs at the country level. And you need to bring that from an aggregation also perspective. Then there's the advocacy level. That's an area where there is a need for improvement. There's really on the COVID. There's been some focus, but the engagement also with other donors to mobilize resources is really something that has to be strengthened in the future. Finally, there's going back again to this lack of monitoring and evaluation at the global level. So that's really an area where there's a need for improvement to track the progress and also to report on this progress against the higher level of objectives. And so that one can also identify what are the gaps and identify the course correction measures and showcase those areas where it's performing better. So this is an area where there's a little bit of in-house elements to do. And I think that is the last point on findings, if I'm not wrong, Veronique. Yes.
That is. Thank you, Ricardo. So just to pause here for a minute in case folks want to ask for any points of clarification, further detail, or ask questions specific to the findings. I know that was a lot of information on those slides. So anyone want to pose any questions at this point? No, I don't see any hands up. So then we will go straight on to the recommendations section. And that's going to be Linda.
I just say one thing before, Linda, before turning it to you, if that's okay, just to share with the participants. What we did together with the SAG was to also engage throughout the process and get their feedback on the different, we did presentations on the emerging findings. We did also a co-creation workshop on these recommendations, and we also got their feedback, written feedback on the report itself. Over to you, Linda.
Thanks, Ricardo. So in terms of recommendations, there's three levels. So there's strategic level, operational level, and then organizational. So we'll just go through these piece by piece. Again, probably too much information for Friday afternoon, but we'll stick with it. So basically, the question was, are we fit for purpose? We've clearly seen what some of the findings are, and I think it's fair to say that it's those of us who've been immersed in a cluster for a long time, I think the findings are pretty fair and balanced, and there's no kind of major surprises there, but clearly there are areas that we need to address, and particularly as we move into this new phase of humanitarianism and world order. So to remain fit for purpose, basically the challenge that we have as a cluster is to remain highly prioritized and as with our operations and as focused as we can to ensure that we're prioritizing the needs in the countries with greatest need and the populations with greatest need. So the proposition and the recommendation is that we should focus on some of our specific existing strategic priorities. Now, I know many of you sleep with the GHC strategy under your pillow, so you'll be familiar with them. There should be no surprise to you. But obviously, those are the strategic priorities around ensuring the capacity to fulfill the coordination functions at national level and below. Ensuring that we have quality coverage of our programs. So what we are delivering, that's done in respect of appropriate quality. That we're prioritising our health cluster action to the people with greatest needs. Again, this comes back to how do we do that, the tools and processes to do that. And importantly, at all levels, but particularly at global level, we need to diversify our funding base. We've been very constrained in our ability to enable some of the cluster work through restricted funding. And the one main donor we have, who's been extremely generous, obviously is not in a position to assist as they used to. And then the big thing is around being able to demonstrate actually what we achieve. And we know we actually deliver a huge amount of effective action in the field, but we're not articulating that or demonstrating that in a particular way, and that we could be better adapted to highlight where areas for course correction or different ways of working are identified. So the first one around coordination. So this concept of having a scaled down model for surge capacity focusing priority countries. I think we need to say a number of things in here is that we need to retain the capacities that we have for both coordination, information management. But as you will have heard yesterday in the whole discussion around the reset and for area-based coordination, what coordination capacity looks like moving forward is a bit of a mystery. It is not going to be the same model as we have now. We know already in some of the discussions that we've had with the cluster reset team that there may be contexts where we absolutely have to retain dedicated capacities, both in coordination and in information management. But we may also be moving to, or we will be moving in some contexts to where the kind of dreaded double hatting now becomes more acceptable. So we have work to do around that. Then again, what are the coordination demands of working in area-based multi-sectoral approaches? Are they as intense as we have already, or are they different? And who is going to be doing that coordination and information management? Again, we've seen an excellent example today from our colleagues in Myanmar, and we heard yesterday from South Sudan, where again our partners are the ones leading the coordination. So yes, we need to prioritise, we need to have a very focused coordination model, but we're still going to have to work out what that looks like. Just next slide, please. And just before I finish on the coordination, I think this, going back to the source of coordination capacity, we're very heavily reliant at the minute on our standby partners who are fantastic, but in even greater demand. So how do we ensure that we still are able to leverage that level of support when needed, whether that's for new and acute crisis, and do we have to look for different capacity models for the longer term program that we're due? And as you as partners, what are you having to think about in your own capacity to surge as cluster partners in these environments? I mean, we said in a previous meeting that we can still count on probably two hands the number of our international partners who are doing co-coordination functions. So will this change now radically as we leverage our local partners and they become more engaged and embedded in the leadership of the cluster? In terms of to. So we want to prioritise who we're delivering our assistance to, and we want to ensure that that assistance has sufficient appropriate coverage to meet the needs and is also of quality. Now, we know that meets the both technical and operational standards within the sector. Now, our quality task team, as you know, has been very active over the years in producing lots of relevant guidance and tools. Big discussions again in the past around what was an essential or what is the content of an essential service package through the health cluster. That conversation is coming back to the top of the list again, as we will not have the same level of resource to provide such a wide range of services. So again, we are going to need to reconsider what we're prioritising in response to needs clearly defined by the community and not a kind of top-down approach by us. And then how do we monitor those the delivery of that assistance? How are we ensuring coverage and how are we monitoring the quality? And then how do we ensure that partners have the capacity to deliver? We know that partner capacity is highly variable now. And as we may be moving into a wider range of partners that we're less familiar with now, that doesn't mean to say they don't have capacity, but we need to have a new understanding of what our partner capacities are across the different levels that we're working with. To help us in this and our programming more generally is obviously the issue around information management. We just heard in the Myanmar section the challenges of having access to information, both in terms of partners reporting, but then even where there is reporting taking place, how that information is being shared and then utilised to inform both decision making and the shape of our programme. Now, again, it goes back to the coordination capacity and the questions that are being flagged now as part of the reset, where there are strong indications that core functions such as information management may become pooled. So what does that mean for the health cluster? Does that mean we no longer have dedicated health cluster IMOs? Does it mean that that service for the information management service is more generic and supplied to all clusters and not just things? So how do we ensure that we receive the specialised and can provide the specialised information we need, both to identify what the health needs are, advocate for those health needs using strong evidence, and then obviously having the information to monitor and evaluate whether we are having appropriate coverage and impact of what we deliver. Next slide, please. So still at the strategic level, so multi-sector coordination, this is something we've been talking about some time. With strategic priority 3 in our current strategy is around advancing inter-cluster multi-sectoral coordination. And we have quite a good baseline piece of work, particularly with the BHA funded work that we've done with the global between health, nutrition, food security, WASH, and slightly parallel the protection clusters. And again, we have some good examples where that has been driven forward at country level. But the evaluation identifies that while progress is being made, it's still quite ad hoc, it's not widespread, it's not widely adopted across the health cluster. And is patchy. I mean, it's interesting in the reset discussion we've had now that the intercluster work in Somalia that was done by Health, Wash, Nutrition, Food Security, Protection and Shelter is being held up as good practice, and we know there's other good practice elsewhere. But how do we inculcate this further? And more importantly, how do we do that within the area-based coordination approach that we're going into? So we do have some experience of multi-sector coordination, but we need to strengthen it, and we need to be able to particularly develop it at the subnational and local level, which frankly is where some of our weakest points have been when we look at some of the lesson learning we've done from the 4 cluster work. We do have weaknesses at the kind of lower admin levels. So again, how do we enhance partner capacity to work in this way? And how do we ensure the connections with the key partners, whether those are NGOs, but also the health sector itself? How are they effectively done moving forward? Next slide, thanks. Well, Ricardo talked about Nexus. What to say? It's tricky. It's always going to be tricky. And I think this is it's slightly chicken and egg, is who's making the first move on the nexus? Is it the health system? Is it the humanitarian sector? How do we come together in that sort of joint approach from the outset of her programming? And then how is it supported, particularly as the reset is indicating that clusters go back to being short-term stopgap coordination that should be transitioned and deactivated at the earliest opportunity. So this also has implications for the way we engage from the outset of a crisis to link with the different facets of the health system, but also how we start preparing the transition concept from the outset and work towards that. And that will require us again to have a much deeper engagement with our local partners, whether that's through the health system itself or through our local and national actors or CBOs. So to support that, and you'll see in the main report, while there's kind of compliment about that, we have advanced our AEP work and we have made a really strong start in our localization. And these both need to be sort of very much deepened in terms of our AEP work, and then accelerated and deepened in our localization. And I have no doubt that we will do that, but it requires all of us as cluster partners and the unit here and the coordination teams in country to further pivot the focus of where we're putting our level of effort and the way that we are engaging and supporting partners to implement in this way. Next slide, please. Diversify donor funding needs us to, well, become no surprise to anybody that that's quite a constant conversation that the cluster unit here has with WHO as our cluster lead agency, and also I know with our HCC colleagues online, it's a conversation they have as well. It's not that it's recognised it has to be done, but I think we're obviously going to be doing that in a much tighter fiscal environment than we are now, than anybody expected. And all the more reason, therefore, that we must be able to demonstrate our added value. And as it says, present the good news of what we're doing, perhaps being a little shy of doing that. We have, again, good examples, but they're quite individual and not necessarily a kind of real strategic approach to doing that. So hence, as you go to recommendation 3 there, about having a much more robust monitoring and evaluation framework, incorporating some of the approaches that we have now, but really linking it to a fully agreed well-defined framework with clearly set KPIs for the different levels, both against our strategic objectives, but also at country level. So that'll be a key piece of work, certainly with the SAG moving forward. Next slide, please. So just moving on to the operational level. I'm not going to go into this in too much depth because I've kind of said it already in terms of what capacities are needed to function effectively in country. And as we heard from the reset sessions yesterday, the role of the cluster will be different in moving forward. We'll very much have a national level function where the cluster is activated. But as early as going to subnational and then local levels, we will most likely go into multi-sectoral coordination. So this requires us to think again, what are the role and the function of the coordinators at the different level, and again, the information management capacities to support that. One issue being mooted fairly strongly within the reset and really coming from the humanitarian coordinators themselves is that they would like to have a stronger accountability line, a direct accountability line to the clusters themselves between the humanitarian coordinator and the cluster coordinators themselves. So that will bring a different dynamic to what we're doing. And I hope I'll hear from the guys online, but hopefully make a more dynamic engagement to help make the architecture more responsive to the needs that we have. I mean, I know many of you in the field on your daily basis feel that the current communication mechanism through ICCG to HCT to HC is cumbersome, and hopefully this will have a strong kind of more direct line, but also direct communication and stronger level expectations on accountability and action. So this is something that we'll look forward to moving forward. Next slide, please. Okay, this is going back to having the right sort of tools. So strategic priority 3 is obviously is our information management in the GHC strategy, and core functions 3 and 4 at country level is also about information management and providing a service packages. So again, this is about adapting the information management function that we have. I think that obviously we have an internal dialogue to have around that. We have a very well-defined and evidence-based suite of tools. Our public health information standards were originally developed by the cluster and subsequently adopted more widely by the emergencies programme. They've been well accepted and have certainly improved our work substantially. But have we gone too complicated? Do we need to narrow this down to fewer tools that give us just the basic information we need? And can we have lighter tools and guidance? There's a feeling that some of the tools we use are still too heavy, take too long to provide the real-time information that's now being demanded. So we need to go back and there's already discussions going on now, but we'll go back again and look at what are the minimum standards we need for effective evidence-based cluster response, and then what are the minimum suite of tools that are easier to use. But of course, this is not in isolation because we're part of the wider information management approach in the sector. I think many of us are finding it quite interesting now that, having spent years banging our heads on how to develop GIAF to be even more prioritised, to prioritise even more prioritised, and we're being asked again to reprioritise, that now people are challenging that tool. And so there'll be pressures from the wider environment as well as to adaptations to tools that we're using now to focus our work and gather the appropriate level of information. Next slide, please. Okay, this is kind of saying the same around information management. So it's about retaining this capacity, not only in ongoing operations, but as we go through the kind of more nexus approach and the transitioning out of clusters, that we start very early on and right from the outset to really assert this asserting the temporary nature of the clusters, but the ownership of the coordination. But that requires us then to be able to transfer the approaches that we're using or integrate the approaches that we're using into existing systems in a way that can be rapidly sort of transitioned and owned by national actors. So again, this is a piece of work. Some of the early guidance we've seen is looking at clusters potentially being transitioned out between 12 to 18 months, like from activation. Those of us who are old enough to remember, that was the expectation in the early days, that a cluster would be kind of out and gone after a couple of years. How feasible that is in many of the contexts we are now remains to be seen, but there will be this drive for much earlier and an accelerated transition. Some of you are dealing with that now at country level. So again, how do we support this process? And the information management transfer is one of the most critical parts of that transition. Next slide, please, and I'll stop quite soon. Okay, so at the organisational level, Ricardo, when he was presenting the findings, referred to this slightly siloed approach, this kind of, and many of you will be very familiar with the conversations around that, not everybody being totally familiar around how the cluster works. But what the evaluation does recommend is that it's not that the response model that WHO has, either WHO and its emergency response framework, synapse gap, or indeed the cluster approach and the guidance we have for country offices and what their accountabilities are as cluster lead agency, and our guidance on running a cluster more generally. But there's a high turnover of staff at all levels in the organisation, whether it's across departments here at HQ, at regional level, and certainly at country level. And not everybody is familiar on how to work or the information that they need to engage in these different processes, or how to then actually operationalize them. So we have much more work to do as a cluster to keep inculcating the information around how we work, and also demonstrating how we connect with the different parts of the organisation, and vice versa. This is a mutual responsibility. The issues around preparedness, particularly, we know ourselves it's a weak point, so it's no surprise this came out in the evaluation. Certainly quite a lot of outreach was done post-COVID. The COVID work and the studies we did there really identified where preparedness gaps were, and certainly there's been outreach at global level to address that. But again, these are not things that happen overnight, but we need to accelerate and prioritise this work within our next strategy. And that needs to be driven and very much to get a strategic message from WHO to the other parts of WHO here within the emergencies programme and beyond to engage in this. And then again, point 2 is around essentially the enabling functions that you as partners want to see from WHO. And it was talked about again this afternoon. You need supplies. I mean, WHO is a huge supplier, quite often the main pipeline for health supplies to partners. Again, logistics support. We're experimenting in a number of areas around having joint health logistics working groups along with a global logistics cluster and with between WHO and UNICEF and obviously the logistics cluster WFP. So how can we further capitalise and learn on that to be more efficient? How can WHO take that forward with the cluster? We have some embryonic ideas there, but the evaluation recommends that we further advance that. So I will stop there. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Linda and Ricardo, both. Linda, how would you prefer to do the Mentimeter first or open it up for Q&A?
Maybe do some Q&A if people have got ideas, because what we'd like you then to do is, having heard this, and I know it's a bit of an overload, but we're going to provide you with just some top level recommendations and get you, based on what you've heard now, to, from your perspective as a partner, as a Global Health Cluster member, say where you think we should focus first. But I think it might be quite good to get some initial reactions, Mary, if that's all right.
Sounds good. So we will open it up for questions either in the chat or please raise your hand. And maybe if you could give me the prerogative of the moderator to start, because, you know, having this evaluation in the midst of the discussion on the reset, I think is extremely helpful and enlightening in a way. For me, I think a lot of the reset discussions, the clusters have really been under fire, if I can put it that way. I think they've taken a big hit, the bulk of the criticism in a lot of what the reform reset is looking at. But one thing I like to remind people of is of all the mechanisms and processes within the architecture and within the IASC, the clusters are the most inclusive of those mechanisms. If you look at our meeting today, if you look at clusters at the country level, this is really the mechanism where partners, operational partners in particular, have a chance to contribute and engage. And to that line of thinking, Linda and Ricardo, what would you like to see from this partnership as we reflect on the recommendations? You know, I think you mentioned there's going to be a shift in coordination. We're going to be going toward an area-based coordination focus. We're going to be looking at localization and leadership. What can partners do to move us forward with regard to health? I do have some concerns also on, as we prioritize needs, what will be our role in sort of ensuring and advocating that health needs get the profile in emergencies that is required. So I know it's sort of a broad range of points here, but just to Linda and Ricardo, if you want to react on that, and I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks, Mary. Can I go first, Ricardo?
You're the expert.
Okay, fair point, Mary. I think, look, these recommendations, inevitably, as evaluations are very high-level recommendations. And one of the next steps that we'll obviously go to is developing a management response plan. And that's, so the first ask is that the GHC SAG are heavily involved in the development of that management response plan, which will, of course, bring these macro recommendations down to a much more granular level. I think in terms of what can the cluster partnership do, well, I'm sure every single one of you, just as we've been doing here, have just had your own, or probably in the middle of, intense internal discussion about your own organizations, what your role is, how you're going forward. Are you having to change your strategy? Are you changing your capacities? Are there some things now you can't do? Are there other things you think, well, we're not going to do that anymore, we're going to pivot? Everybody's having that conversation. And I think we need to, as a collective, we need to understand that a bit more. We haven't really had that discussion yet, but I think we can have that discussion in alignment with this more detailed, more granular management response plan. And it will be questions like, okay, well, where is coordination going to, who is willing to take on coordination capacity? How can we accelerate our localization strategy to really leverage the 75% of our partners are local and national actors? What is the changing role? What are you as international organizations? Are you going to change your functions? What capacities are you changing? So I think there's a whole suite of conversations still to have, and maybe that's a series of dialogue that needs to take place. Again, some of it's unknown because we don't quite know. I mean, we saw the letter today from Tom Fletcher post the principals, essentially saying, we had our meeting about the reset, we're going ahead, but it still doesn't say how we're going to do that. And this is what we're all grappling with. And I think part of it is about maybe trying to be ahead of the game within our own cluster. There will be external forces that will drive us in certain directions, but I think starting to have the conversations ourselves. So I'm just throwing out ideas. Maybe there needs to be a solid discussion around what does area-based coordination mean? What experiences we have? What are we learning from that? And I'm not saying doing big, heavy studies. I'm saying conversations. We know partners who are involved in that already. Do we need to resurvey partner capacity? The last one we did was in 2018, 2019. It cost a fortune. We have no money. We can't do it like that again. But how can we capture that? So let's find a different way of identifying capacities. I just think it's a set of conversations that need to be had, but we really need to move ahead with the management response plan and drill down into some of these key issues. Over to you, Ricardo.
Thank you. I'll come with my more heretic evaluation hat to this conversation. So I think with recommendations, you've got a set of elements where the partners have a key role to play and to address. And there, as Linda was referring to, there's a management response that goes much more granular. And there, it's very important to define among the partners who supports, who can co-lead some of these elements. And I think it's really the building blocks in the middle of the reset where you've got this deliver, devolve, and defend kind of headings. I think you can go to the, for instance, advocacy component, the devolution of also the leadership. Some of these recommendations flow into that dimension and will help get the profile of health, which is the most important element and that brings you all together as partners. And if there is a joint strategy that comes out of this evaluation, which was the primary objective of doing this, this would feed. And we've added a year in the implementation because there's also the reset coming in the mix. So it's how do we connect the dots? And that to connect the dots is going back to the different consultations that you're going to go through in the process throughout. But you really need to identify what are the building blocks of the new strategy, have the resources, obviously, to implement the strategy, measure the performance of the strategy, and finding also how each partner's contributes to achieve these higher level results, because that's where health is going to get a profile, is going to get traction. Obviously, I mean, I've seen many evaluations where everybody recognizes that health is one of the primary needs in crisis. Fair enough. But now there is a key element where donors are reducing their envelope. Therefore, it's really important that M&E component to show the value for money of investing in health in these crises. So tagging also to these elements where there is this system strengthening, where it's not just a supply-driven response, is critical, and seeing, I think, the broader picture on how really to anchor health within contexts that are in crisis, but that is not just from the outside, that smashes local capacity, but is really something that is a conduit for then a devolution of authority. Lots of these elements in the reset, I was telling this yesterday to Ted, this is old, new wine in old bottles. We've heard these things so much, but now the key element is that resources are going down. And therefore, it's really important because all of us are experiencing cuts and prioritization at an internal level from our own unique organizations. And I do think that these recommendations bring together some elements that are for reflection and are to pave the way forward on how do we operate. And we really need to tease that out also in the prioritization that we're going to do after the Q&A to focus on certain areas and really demand that we are able to demonstrate that this sector needs more investment, because there's going to be also competition with other sectors. We need to be mindful of that. And some of you also work in different sectors. But I do think that we need to anchor, going back to your point, Mary, health, so that it gets a profile and so that we can showcase the results. And these need to be embedded at the end also into the results and the priorities, the national health priorities. And we have all a role to play. Those that work more downstream at the community level, those that will work more upstream. So it is identifying, and it's identifying also how do we collectively work on this new configuration? How do we bring our strengths together among the different partners? And then have a roadmap to implement this strategy, where even if we have a smaller footprint, we are more effective, we are more efficient, and then people recognize that this sector is the layer of the cake that you can't mess up with health, otherwise it's going to affect all the other sectors. Back to you.
Thank you, Ricardo, for those wise words. I think you've set us on a good path here. We do have a question and comment in the chat from Ugo. Ugo, would you like to speak to your question, or shall I read it? No, I can go ahead and read it. It has to do with information management, Linda, which you hit on quite often in the going through the recommendations, and Ricardo in the findings as well, pointing out that what would pooled IM mechanisms really look like. The discussions in the reset around this have been incredibly vague. Ugo, I see your hand up. Please, you'll say it much better than my reading it, so please go ahead.
Hello everyone. Sorry, I had like a headset crash, so I had to unplug everything. Thank you everyone. So yeah, no, as you said, I think in the recommendations, it's clear that we want to focus on this. Ensuring that we have the correct capacity to deliver information management standards and objectives. And as part of the discussions that we've followed as well, whether it is like in NGO groups or in humanitarian research linked consultations, everywhere it's been like incredibly vague. It's like we need to have pooled IM to make it more efficient. Sure, that's a viewpoint that we can have, or another one or other ones that we can have. But I think especially for health, for public health sectors in particular, any sector in particular that is based on those standards and those platforms that are working with public health information standards, or that we can see in other sectors like nutrition related. We know that there is a certain level of technicity that is expected from people working on information management in those sectors. So if this is something that is not clearly defined as part of the way that this pooled mechanism, whatever it will be, is built, I think there is a clear risk that we may not be able to have the correct information, the correct capacity to analyze, and then to prioritize and to plan adequately the response for those contexts. So yeah, wondering if there have been any details on your side and any consideration of what an efficient pooled mechanism could look like, and if it is, like sitting in certain structures or also relying on expert partners, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I'll stop it here. Thank you.
Thanks, Hugo. So I suppose we kind of assume that you guys are sitting in a back room with OCHA coming up with the plans of what pooled a pooled IM function looks like, but clearly not. I'm actually going to ask Luis, who's at one of our IMOs, because it's a conversation we've been having internally, and I think, Luis, you're seeing some trials going on in some countries that raise concerns for us. Do you want to speak to that?
Yes, absolutely. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Linda. And Hugo, that's a fantastic question. I think it's there are some steps that are taking place on regard of different coping mechanisms from OCHA, from other partners. But one of them is the pool IM function. It's like a joint teams that will provide support to all the clusters in different areas. Our biggest concern is that the proposed mechanism is highly OCHA oriented, not to intersectorial, intercluster, and generalistic products in the given emergencies. And we raise our concerns that is, I mean, having those products is so important, but we need to have the capacity to produce and to collect the information that is related to health, and that is specific to our functions in the different scenarios. I mean, and those concerns are not only for health, but also for other clusters that raise similar concerns. But and in addition to that, okay, we understand that we need to be flexible and we need to be fast. And as Linda mentioned during the recommendation section, it's I mean, it's a repetition, but we will need to do more with less. So discussions regarding, okay, with this decreased capacity, which systems will be in place? What will be the capacity of the system to really support the needs of the most affected? What will be the use of artificial intelligence or other techniques that can help to improve our capacity as information managers to to provide the real information that is needed to take decisions. So all that is on the conversation. Those are the topics that we are speaking now. There are some proposals. There were some tests, and they are advancing it with some tests, like in Venezuela and other places. But I think the discussion is still ongoing. It's my impression after participating in several meetings, and we have plenty to apport to the conversation, and to protect the clusters, and for seriously provide the information that is needed at all the levels. So that morally, that is my impression. It's something that is still ongoing, but we will need to be prepared to be flexible in some components, but strong enough for us to be able to comply with our objectives as health cluster. Over.
Can I add a couple of things there? My 2 cents, Linda, just to chip in, because you may find yourselves with those generics that you had back in the days with the MITA, with 5W, and all gravitating around that. But I do think, going back to the question that Hugo was posing, yes, there are threats, but there are also opportunities. And I think the evaluation shows you clear opportunities in terms of that way of devolving the capacity to the national government. And there, if you think about information management, often, and we've seen this in tons of crises across the world, slow onset, fast onset disasters, protracted crisis, where you have these parallel information management systems, and where health can really make a difference, I do think, is to connect the dots, because there will be some which are purely for the humanitarian enterprise, but there are others that are for the health system strengthening, where you do have national decisions which are tied to the data that is collected, that influences the budget that is devolved to the provinces which are affected, especially in those countries which are not fully fragile, but have some parts which are stable, and where the government is in part in the driving seat. Now, in conflicts, that may be a different kind of discussion, but it's really important to have, I think, a discussion among partners on what are obviously the risks, as Hugo was mentioning, but also the opportunities, and to work with a proposal and with a positioning of the health sector, going back to what Mary was saying before. Also, how do we get that profile, or I would even say that value proposition of the health sector on the different components of the reset? I think that is quintessential to be proactive, not to be passive in this avalanche of reform where we don't know, the post is shifting, but seeing what are the opportunities really to strengthen along. And even if the recommendations are generic, as Linda's saying, going to that management response and those action points, you will find a thin red line on how to develop that pathway, and information management as one key component of monitoring and evaluation is something essential to pave the way forward. Back to you.
Thank you, Ricardo. James, you had a comment in the chat. Did you want to speak to that or expand upon that? If you can unmute yourself.
Sure. Sure. Ricardo, I think this kind of emphasized it, that there is an opportunity. I mean, a lot of us come from multi-sectoral agencies, and so this is our bread and butter on a daily basis, trying to balance out how the sectors come together. And we see within our own agencies, when we're multi-sectoral, when the coordination shifts out, often the interest is in terms of simplification and big, pretty numbers that people want to present. That gets very frustrating from a technical point of view. So I think public health broadly is blessed with an incredible evidence database and a lot of specialists. That is going to make it hard for us when we come together, even with just one other, or even more challenging when if we come under, say, an OCHA IM coordination that's going to want to be incredibly simple and no, you get 2 indicators, this sort of stuff that I'm sure you've all heard at various times. And so I agree with the comments of others. We need to get ahead of that and make a proposition, but also I think realize that the pain that we're going to be feeling is going to be the pain that nutrition colleagues are feeling, or WASH colleagues are going to feel, or RCC colleagues who really reach into food security and try and see if we can find a path that makes sense.
Thanks, James. Any other comments, questions? I don't see hands up. So then maybe I will ask Veronique then to take us to the Mentimeter, and she has 2 questions divided between the strategic recommendations and the operational recommendations. So Veronique, would you like to take us through that if you're ready?
Yes.
Okay,
I'm
great.
just going to put this slide up really quickly to give you a chance to take your phones. You can either scan the QR code, or if you're on your laptops, go to menti.com and enter the following code. That's the numbers 1994-3158. And as Mary says, there'll be 2 slides with questions, and then you can vote for each recommendation by moving the related sliders on them. And this goes from 1 to 5, with 1 being strongly disagree and 5 strongly agree. So I'll give you a few minutes. Please don't start voting until I get to the slide. Just get into Menti first. And has everybody been able to get in? I'll stop this now and just quickly take you to the other screen, which will also have the code on it, so don't worry. All right, I see people have already started voting. I'll give a few minutes for everybody to do this.
Oh, and I do see that you only have 28 of the 47 attendants
Yeah.
that have registered. So you may need to give some additional time, Veronique,
Yes,
just so
definitely.
that they can register.
Yeah. Giving them, get that number up.
Yeah, and can you give the code again?
So the code is 1994, and it's just up on the screen, 3158. So menti.com.
Right at the top of the screens. Got it.
Yeah, Tony's just posted the number in the, or yeah, it's posted in the chat as well.
Yeah.
It's a bit like watching a very slow horse race, I have to say.
Yeah, we got 31 out of 35 now. That's good. 32.
Looks like it's a photo finish for third.
Yes, see that. Okay, I think we're almost there. Do we want to look at these results first before we go to the next page, or do the other one? The next page.
Linda, would you like to speak to these results first before we go to the second vote? Yep, see a thumbs up.
What to say? Yeah, you're going to be busy developing your. I'm surprised that local leadership isn't higher up the engagement and accountability isn't more to the strongly agree, but anyway, you can align that with ensure coordination capacity. Donor funding, that's probably just my obsession because I haven't got any. Yeah, I think that of that, I mean, okay, information management is up there, which is no surprise. But yeah, the local leadership engagement is the one that surprises me most. But maybe people are interpreting it with, you can align it with coordination capacity, but fine.
I'm quite pleased to see coordination capacity come out as number one, because actually it was the most effective finding among the findings. It was one of the most effective aspects of the cluster. So
yeah, it's where we have our biggest challenge at the minute. So yeah, okay.
All right. So the next slide is.
Sorry, if I may add one little thing there too. Maybe this will also help us see where to concentrate our efforts together, also with the partners and in the development also of this new strategy.
Yep.
Sorry, Veronique, I just wanted to add that little thing.
That's fine. That's fine. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next slide, which is the operational recommendations.
Okay, it was good because that was just one vote. You shall find.
And is it possible to show the QR code again, or is that going to mess up your screen?
There's the number. If you go into menti.com and then insert the number 1994-3158.
Because I had the QR code up here, but it was sort of blocking the.
Exactly. Okay.
One final effort from our colleagues that are the 9 remaining to vote from those registered. If we can incentivize you to make up your mind. Okay, maybe we'll give another minute to those 9 undecided people. And then
Little technical problem. Give us a second, please.
Okay. Actually, I was thinking about 60, but if you want just one, that's fine.
Oh, Kelly's being rejected. Her submissions are being rejected. Oh my goodness. Kelly. Do a hand vote. Oh, Kelly.
So maybe you can voice, Kelly.
Yeah.
Or comment also if you agree or disagree with what there is up there.
Slip it in the chat if you like, Kelly. We can capture it. Okay, do we feel we're pretty caught up? Thank you, Kelly. Linda, Ricardo, would you like to speak to the results, at least the results as we see them?
I'm not, I mean, fine, they are what they are. I suppose all I would say is that the support cluster transition to national local ownership, while it might look like it's trailing a bit there, it's actually going to require quite a bit of work. We're being, and the good thing is that there is, there's IEC guidance now on cluster transition. But we don't actually have a lot of experience in doing it ourselves, because actually not that many clusters have actually transitioned and deactivated. And of course, transition can take time. So I think this is a piece of work that we do need to pay a bit of attention to. I know some of the cluster colleagues that are on the call are facing this now. We know from the experience in Iraq and others that if it's done too quickly, it's very badly done. It's ineffective, and that's a conversation that we've had and agreed with the EDG. So I think this is something that's going to require some additional focus, and certainly we've been discussing here in the GHC unit about certainly doing some engagement with the health cluster coordinators on it, but I think it's maybe a piece of work that we need to put slightly further up the line here, up the score. Thanks.
I agree actually with Linda on this, and if I can also provide a couple of points on this. If you look across the spectrum, there are few governments like the Pakistani government back in the 2010 floods, when General Ahmed said the cluster's out and we're moving into recovery. And you've got on the other side of the spectrum countries based on this evaluation where the cluster has been active since it has been introduced, so the last 20 years. So maybe there is, if also the funding, there's really an important element there to work. But the issue to me will be, is this for the whole cluster? So working through the NDMAs, or does each cluster, those clusters which are retained, work both through the NDMAs, which have the umbrella of all the response, so the National Disaster Management Authorities, and on the other side, the respective line ministry? Because it depends where the authority is in terms of coordination at national level and subnational level. but the NDMAs have to be empowered, and you can't have parallel coordination systems there. They have to be built in. I remember, back in the days in the Philippines, even where you had on two sides of Manila, the coordination taking place and people getting stuck in the middle of traffic jam. Now with the Zooms and the Teams, that would not happen, but you really need to embed this transition, I think, from the start, and maybe even embed the platforms within the national government, and there may be some agencies that can help strengthen those. So this will be something quintessential. And the other is, going back to Linda's point, there's a skew, I think, in the voting of who's voting. Obviously, if we had national government officials in the call, that would get the highest score. Back to you.
Thank you both. And, I think there will be, as Linda mentioned too, there will be this pressure, if we can use the term, in terms of deactivation of clusters within a more standardized timeframe that will probably play into number 3 as well. James has a question. Split views and localization. Would anyone who gave 2 or 3 like to share their thinking? I don't know. Does anyone like to share their thinking in terms of localization? And that's referring back to the previous screen, correct, James? Yeah. I think one thing that Linda mentioned, perhaps people captured it in terms of coordination and thinking in terms it was captured with that first point in terms of coordination capacity. But anyone wanted further discussion on localization and where it landed?
If I may, Mary, I was referring to the transition, which I guess maybe it's two sides of the same coin.
Okay.
All
right.
And I noticed a comment on it's very contextual. So I could well imagine that if you're thinking about Myanmar, this seems super premature. But I guess I might say, well, should you have a conversation to say what would be the characteristics that you'd look for to start that conversation? And is that a priority? But again, over to others for their views.
Thank you for that. Sarah, is that your hand up?
Yes, that's my hand up because I wrote that comment. It also depends on the context. I think it maybe in my mind, if we go back to all the very reasons that we do cluster coordination or why it's so important for the people that we serve on the ground, I think it's number 3 is we might have to be careful. So if we were to do this in Sudan, for example, I don't think it's possible in Sudan at the moment with what's going on in the different areas inside Sudan. Transitioning to national local ownership might mean that the goals of why we do it, in that people need to be served, might not then be met for all the political reasons and all the different points of views that the different parties inside Sudan have. In fact, even looking at Sudan as an example, it would be very difficult to decide who would own the cluster the way it is right now. So in some of those contexts, I think maybe this point is really important, but maybe it has to be really heavily contextualized, that within a context, maybe there is a need to study it better and to understand better whether by transitioning it, are we making it difficult for people to get the services that they need to get, or it will benefit them, I think. Thank you.
Can
Thanks,
I just
Sarah.
pose a question, Mary, on this? Because if I understand both what James and Sarah were suggesting, I mean, the first dimension is also the degree of maturity within the context of, and the other is the polarization if you are in a conflict kind of situation and whether you can do or not. So my question there is, how would you formulate this? Because this, when we think also about the management response, I do agree. Yes, it's really relevant, the contextual dimension. But is it around maturity and is it around conflict that there are kind of those elements to consider, or there are other elements too?
To your point, to your question, Ricardo, both Kelly and Melanie added, yes, that would have to be contextualized in terms of where governments are adverse to the populations in need, adversarial, and protracted conflict where there would be difficulties as well. Government legitimacy as well, as James added. Yeah.
Would put even populations at risk, maybe. No? Or breaching with fundamental principles of neutrality and independence, no?
Great. We are at time. So I do, and Linda's put in the guidance on cluster transition into the chat, which is maybe give some further food for thought. But I think we will need to close. I don't know, Linda or Ricardo, if you want to quickly add anything in terms of next steps on the process. I know, Linda, you spoke to it a bit, and so did you, Ricardo, already. But is there anything else you would like to add?
Ricardo, over to you.
I would just like to ask a question to the participants because, you know, both Linda and myself have invested some time in this exercise. So if any of you has a view, and you've participated in many of these exercises, on the usefulness of this exercise before we delve into the next steps.
And the usefulness of this exercise being the evaluation.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. I wanted to clarify that. Anyone like to speak to that? Perhaps SAG members who actually suggested the evaluation as well. Yeah, I see a couple. Trina, I see your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. And I think it's been a good discussion. I think from the perspective of having been a part of the SAG a number of times over the course of this feedback evaluation, I think it's very, in the intention of doing the evaluation, it was critical for us to be able to look back and to see what has worked well, what has not worked well as we move into the next strategic plan. So we're finishing off one. We'll be looking at what the strategy is for the health cluster moving forward with all of the changes that have happened this year, with the reset, with funding, et cetera. I think it was really critical for us to be able to look at what pieces of the work that the health cluster has been doing has been really critical for partners to enable their response on their ground, to inform them, and really to look at all of these pieces of efficiency and quality, et cetera. So I think it's been very useful in order to help us in this time of prioritization to say, yes, these are the interventions that the cluster does that are the most critical. So that when we can't do everything, we won't be able to do everything. And so I think it's a really important feedback mechanism for the cluster itself to inform next steps and how we approach whatever is happening in the future. Thanks.
Thanks, Trina. James and Ugo. James, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, really echoing Trina's comments. There's an old axiom, plans are terrible, but planning is everything. And I just sort of wonder if the same is not true for this. Whatever shadows might lie in the evaluation, because it started before the humanitarian reset, because we were evaluating ourselves and that conversation was happening as Trina described. So we're in a much better position today to go forward. So thanks for that, Ricardo and whole team that put that together.
Thanks, James. Ugo, please.
Yeah, thank you for this. To be fair for us, I think it's also the first year that we are formally a member of the cluster. So I think it's been very interesting to look at this, and thank you again. I think my general reflection would be that it's always good to have these results. I think we'll be looking forward to accessing the full reports, because I think necessarily for the sake of presentations, we always have like more general recommendations, let's say in those PowerPoints, because I'm sure that the level of details will be much greater in the final products. I think linked to some of the recommendations as well, especially those that are around the necessity to develop a clear monitoring and evaluation framework, and the necessary reflection around effectiveness of the aid that is delivered by the health cluster partner. I think what would be super interesting for the future and future models of this evaluation is precisely to focus on the evaluation of what will be developed as the M&E framework and this reflection around the effectiveness. And I think on our side, as impact initiatives and REACH, we're also starting to think a lot about what kind of research and what kind of analytical framework we can develop around this idea of aid effectiveness. And so I think this is a really nice converging kind of thematic that I'm sure will be very interested to look at what's being developed within the cluster in the future. And yeah, if we can participate to some extent to some of the discussions and some of the developments, we'll be very, very interested to do so. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Hope that was helpful comments, Ricardo, I think, for you to take forward. Yeah, there's a couple of comments in the chat as well with regard to the evaluation. I think we'll need to close here. I know, again, as far as the next steps, as I understand it, the report will be finalized and approved, and the management response will be developed. But is there anything else you, Linda or Ricardo, want to add in terms of next steps in a timeline?
Ricardo?
In terms of next steps, we're going to have the final report out next week. We're going to have the final report out next week. There's going to be also a brief together. There's going to be a management response developed. So Linda and myself are going to sit with Altaf, and the person which is going to OIC, Linda, is going to be together with Altaf developing this management response. I guess several of the issues that you've presented in terms of the discussions that Linda was saying, those will be timed. And what I would suggest is also that you monitor as a group what is being done differently. I like very much the suggestion, by the way, that Sam, you were making. I think it's an excellent suggestion. And if there is a group working on that M&E framework, I think that's a great proposition to do, and we should keep the spirit collaborative, because this is going to be a journey that involves all of us. So I do know there's a change in leadership with Linda going, so I would like to also thank her for engaging in this evaluation. That's the first next step I should have done, by the way.
Linda, would you like to add to that?
Which bit?
Next steps?
No, the next steps are as laid out. So as I say, we'll circulate. So the report will be circulated to all the GHC partners, and it will be published on the website as well. So you'll all get time to digest it, and then it's for the unit and the SAG to agree also with ALTAF. I mean, within WHO, the management response plan will have an internal process, because obviously there has to be consultation with the regions with it, and then also consultation with the SAG. So developing that plan, we'll know that after how long that will take. We'll know that after we have the conversation next Thursday. So.
Thanks. You have a closing out session. I'm closing this session, but am I turning this back over to Gabrielle at this point?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mary. We have 6 minutes before the end. So let me close a bit, wrapping up a bit with some key points after these two days of global cluster coming at critical juncture during this building up of the reset. As we mentioned yesterday, reset is a kind of proactive response to this crisis, funding mainly, but also legitimacy and morale. And the reset want to do the 4 things, the 4 Ds, so determined to save life while remaining principle, to deliver efficiently and effectively, to defend against the attacks on civilians and aid workers, and to devolve indeed the power accountability. So this devolving power accountability we have seen yesterday can also come into the form, under the form of this ABC, area-based coordination, to have a more inclusive, context or locally led accountable coordination. Keywords here are community engagement and the multisectoriality, but we also needed to be aware of some concern and threat, as we were saying before. We still need to see how this will look like. So it's important really that WHO, the global cluster partner, all of us, continue to actively as well advocate for health within the coordinated response. We need to as well support in that sense the ABL, who will probably be a generic person, so and not a specialist, a technical one. There are concerns, there is a threat, like for example, we have mentioned before as well about this IAM pooled, IAM information management. So as we said before, we need to be proactive in this avalanche that is the reset. Regarding the community engagement, today we have seen as well how, again, the word trust came out in the first presentation, the first session, to give trust as well from the health cluster coordinator to these local actors, and then by giving trust to them, community engagement as well, building trust with the community, which is today even more essential to have as well more effective intervention, to have accessibility as well, and to have the so-called sustainability. As we said yesterday, we cannot think to work in a vacuum, but we need to consider that the bulk that what we are doing today has to be resilient, so sustainable, has to build on the existing structure. So this is also something that we need to consider when we talk about sustainability, and as well a bit the suggestion that we were mentioning before in terms of opportunities for IM, for example, to build on the existing as well capacity of the national government. However, here depend on the context, which depend as well on the level of maturity. From the global cluster evaluation, much has been already said. What we can just say in a few words, yes, the global cluster in the past 15 or 5 years has been relevant and has been efficient. We need to increase and work more on this efficiency as well, because now we will have even less funding available. We need to focus to really hone in on the most important cluster functions, so the cluster function 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so support service delivery, as well as to informed decision making. We have seen that in the strategic as well, our Mentimeter strategic recommendation, we had indeed ensuring as a number one, number two, ensuring coordination capacity and information management. Surprise, we saw less quality, although I think the cluster has to remain as well the technical enablers for health in a way to capacitate as well at the ABC level. The risk of the ABC also, as we saw yesterday and today has been again mentioned, is indeed the disconnection between the central level and the peripheral level. We need to work also on this or connecting these two levels in a way that at central level, if I may say, we need to identify the where and the who. So where are the greatest need, who can be best placed to respond to those needs. And at this peripheral level, by going into more deeper community engagement as well, we need to understand the what and the how we should do those things and what we should do based on the needs and the priority of the community as well. Finally, the last point, which is I think a very critical one for all of us, is diversify funding, to have as well flexible funding to respond, but also to be able as a global cluster to show what we are doing. We are doing so much good. We need to be also smart enough to show all what we are doing. So before giving, and with this, of course, I close, I wrap up this day as well as these 2 days, but before giving the word for the closing remark to Linda, Linda, I know that you don't like ceremonials, so just sorry about this. So I ask as well the SAG member and all the other people if they wanted to put on your camera. So let me say something to you. As you are finishing this service, you have done for more than 10 years. You started, if I remember right, in 2014. Before that, you were in Merlin, and before that, you started even with MSF many years ago. So thank you for your truthful and faithful service, for your determination, which has been always coupled with grace and gentleness. Needless to say, you have critically contributed in shaping the global cluster in the way that it stands today, a body which has been able to deliver in a coherent, relevant, and efficient way. I would add as well effective way, although we are not so sure according to the evaluation, but effective way, able to save human lives and protect the well-being and dignity of the affected population. As a co-chair of this saga and working with you in the last 2 years, I testify your professionalism, vision, guidance, and wisdom. So I'm sure that I can represent everyone to say to you now, thank you.
Thanks, Gabriel. Well, it's actually my thanks to all of you. I mean, it's 10 years is the quickest 10 years ever. But the best bit of it has been working in partnership, obviously. So my thanks to all of you who've diligently participated at the global level, but probably more importantly, and often least talked about, all our colleagues at country level, who really are the ones that deliver on what we sit and pontificate and strategize at global level. So I'm around until the end of next week, or till next Thursday. So I've got one more week to annoy you all. And then what will happen while they're busy or continue to recruit my replacement, what they'll do is EBA has kindly asked to sort of lead the team and support the countries and the program of work here until my replacement is taken in. So yeah, all to say, yes, I don't like ceremony, but I will say thanks again. It's been fantastic. I'll be stalking you online, needless to say, to see what you're up to when I'm not around. And retirement, the R word, does not feature in my lexicon, so I'm sure I'll touch paths or cross paths with some of you in the near future, once I've had a bit of a rest and renovated my flat. But yeah, great. It's I know it's a really difficult phase right now, but in some ways, you know, out of chaos comes opportunity. It was a bit like that when I came into post as well. So as you say, keep the faith and keep pushing the cluster, and whatever it looks like moving forward, it still has a function to play. And you guys are the ones that are going to shape it moving forward. So all the best to you, and thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Have a nice continuation of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Cheers.